As Britain faced the threat of invasion from Nazi Germany, the Local Defence Volunteers, or LDV, were formed in May 1940. Initially, the LDV was composed of volunteers from various walks of life. Some of these volunteers were too young for the army, or were maybe veterans of the First World War and considered too old. Nevertheless, they took on the responsibility of defending their local communities. LDV volunteers were not initially provided with standard military equipment, but instead relied on whatever resources were available to them, with members sometimes bringing personal firearms or weapons from the First World War, such as bayonets or knives. There are even accounts of people bringing pitchforks and spears. Understandably, a good sense of humour was prevalent among many members of the LDV, who were sometimes called the Look, Duck and Vanish Brigade, demonstrating a good sense of humour amongst the volunteers. It is reported that some of the armed members of the LDV were on strict orders not to even load their gun unless they had spoken with an invading German. Nicknames such as Look, Duck and Dive demonstrate the perceived quirks and characteristics of the units and their members. There are numerous accounts of humorous incidents during training exercises and mock battles, such as stories of soldiers accidentally firing their rifles in the wrong direction or getting tangled up in barbed wire during drills. But I suppose these can happen to any unit. These mishaps often became sources of laughter and camaraderie amongst the troops, as well as the civilians. LDV members would do drills with wooden rifles and organised patrols, with some patrols lasting all through the night. They were ready to report on enemy activity, such as planes being shot down or invasion from the sea. There were many stories around at that time regarding the different ways that Germans might try and invade, including that it was even considered possible that enemy troops would parachute in from the skies dressed as nuns. LDV units relied on basic communication methods such as whistles, flags and hand signals to report on enemy movements. They also maintained observation posts and patrols to monitor potential invasion routes and gather intelligence. Initially, LDV units didn't have a uniform, only an armband with the letters LDV, but eventually the LDV became incredibly resourceful and would even gather a comforts fund for those fighting overseas. The LDV later renamed to the Home Guard and played a crucial role in Britain's defence strategy, particularly in the early stages of the war when the threat of invasion was most imminent. The Home Guard would even do mock battles with the army over a weekend. One of these mock battles took place on a Sunday morning. The army decided to do a surprise attack and advance in the middle of the night before dawn. The commanding officer of the Home Guard refused to engage in hostilities before even having breakfast, so the army routed the Home Guard in the middle of breakfast, with the commanding officer subsequently losing his job. Although something of a joke at the time, eventually equipped and unified, the Home Guard stood as a formidable domestic fighting force, with each member prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for their country.
Now a girl on the land was waving her hand, as happy as can be. Talk of invasion, she wasn't afraid. She winked her eye at me and murmured, come on, invade. When the lads of the village get cracking, down the road to victory. When the lads of the village get cracking, and the whole world turns out, off we go, rain or snow, just like proper soldiers.